We have been taught to believe that if there was any education in the pre-British India, it must have been confined to Brahmins and other upper castes. The surveys compiled in the Beautiful Tree indicate that it was the Shudras in the castes below them. There are these Shudras and other classes below them that form the overwhelming majority of the students at school. The collector of Bellary wrote that while Ramayana, Mahabharata and Bhagavata were studied by all, yet the manufacturing classes of people had, in addition to these books, other books peculiar to their own tenets, such as Nagalingayana Katha or Vishwakarma Purana, which will be peculiar to the merchant classes. One of the first interventions of the British in education was to replace these textbooks with the new textbooks that had no relation to the society from which the students came. Indian education could not have been private because India never considered education or learning to be an economic good. It would have been considered a sacrilege for a teacher to demand payment in return for imparting education, or for a student to pay a teacher money as hire for his services. So today we talk about Dharampalji's seminal work, The Beautiful Tree, Indigenous Indian Education in the 18th Century. This book gives us a fully documented picture of the widespread and very efficient indigenous system of education, both at the school and the higher levels, that prevailed in almost all parts of India before the British came here and went about systematically destroying almost all of it and replacing it with their own system. And that system which the British established, fortunately or unfortunately, remains with us till today. For this talk, we shall confine ourselves to the description of the indigenous system only at the school level, though Dharampalji's book gives much details about the education at higher levels, what we call the college level now. Dharampal was a Gandhian historian of the 18th century India. He spent several years in the British Indian Archives in England to painstakingly study what the British administrators and other European observers had written about different aspects of the society that they first observed and encountered here in India before they went about destroying it. The Beautiful Tree is one of the several books that Dharampalji wrote on the basis of his exploration into the British archives of that period. His other books tell us about indigenous sciences and technologies, about indigenous social and political organizations, about many other aspects of Indian society in the 18th and early 19th century, about which we may discuss in other videos. The Beautiful Tree presents mainly the data of a survey of indigenous education that Thomas Munro, then Governor of Madras Presidency, had ordered in 1822. He asked the collectors of the 21 districts that comprised the presidency to compile data on the number of native schools and also colleges in their districts and the number of scholars studying in them in a specific format with separate columns for Brahmins, Vaishyas, Shudras, other classes, and Muslims. It took nearly 3 years for all of the collectors to send this data. Many of the collectors, while sending the data in the prescribed format, also wrote detailed reports giving some idea of the teachers, the syllabi, the books, and the system of education in general. Number of hours the students spent, what was the physical structure of the school, all that some of them are reporting. The reports received from the 21 collectors were compiled together, and then Thomas Munro wrote a detailed minute analyzing the data and recording his opinion about education in India. Beside the survey of Madras Presidency, which The Beautiful Tree published for the first time, the book also contains extracts from the voluminous report of William Adam on the state of education in some districts of Bengal and Bihar, which were published between 1835 and 1838. The book also includes brief extracts from the history of education in the Punjab since annexation and in 1882. This is by G.W. Leitner. The data covered in The Beautiful Tree thus encompasses a very large part of India. The 21 districts of Madras Presidency comprise the whole of the current states of Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and parts of Kerala, Telangana, and Odisha. And then Adams' reports covered much of northern Bengal and much of southern Bihar. Leitner's book covered all of Punjab, including the western Punjab, which has now gone to Pakistan. The main lesson that one learns from this voluminous data that has been collected in this book is that before the coming of the British here, school education was widely prevalent in all parts of India. Adam and Leitner suggest, and these are very well-known statements, that elementary education was in fact universal. Adams' report famously states that there were 1 lakh village schools in parts of Bengal and Bihar that those reports covered. This amounted to about a school for every 400 persons. And in every 400 persons, you can expect some 31 to 32 boys of school-going age, which means that according to the data collected by Adam for districts of Bengal and Bihar, there was a school for almost every 30 boys of school-going age, which of course means that the school education was universally available to everybody. Leitner from Punjab suggests that there were 3,30,000 pupils in Punjab at the time of annexation, which was in 1849 when Punjab was defeated. And this number had declined to 1,90,000 from 3,30,000 to 1,90,000 in 19 years of British rule in Punjab. He also says that in the Punjab, there was not a mosque, a temple, a dharamshala that had not a school attached to it. There were also thousands of secular schools, frequented alike by Mohammedans, Hindus, and Sikhs. There were hundreds of learned men who gratuitously taught their co-religionists and sometimes all comers. In respectable Mohammedan families, husbands taught their wives and these their children, nor did the Sikh prove in that respect to be unworthy of the appellation of learners and disciples. The word Sikh comes from Shishya, and he's playing pun on that the Sikhs are supposed to be Shishyas. And in the Punjab that he was observing, they were as much interested in education as every other community of that area. In fact, Punjab, this system where the Gurdwaras also taught, the masjids also taught, every house also there was some teaching going on. I think this continued to prevail till perhaps 1960s. It must have been so in most other parts of India also. Munro of the Madras Presidency on the basis of the data received from the 21 collectors, estimated that at least 1/4 of the male population of the presidency in the relevant age group was at school. He also suggested that there were a large number of boys who received education at home. For Madras, his estimate was that the number taught at home was 5 times the number that were being taught at school. If we take that proportion, he's talking about in Madras city, he's talking about 5 times the number were being taught at home compared to what they were being taught in the school. And we take that proportion of homeschooling to be the same in other provinces of the presidency, then it would imply that there was universal education, that every school-going boy of the school-going age was in fact going to school. The number of girls recorded in all these surveys is not very significant, except in Malabar, which formed part of Madras presidency. But all of the observers suggest that girls were largely taught at home. And as Leitner says, wives were taught by their husbands and the mothers then taught their children. So home education was also highly prevalent, and the number Munro is giving is very large, that if there was one child at school, there were 5 being taught at home. It should be remembered that these surveys in different parts of the country were undertaken several decades after the establishment of British rule in a particular area, by which time the indigenous system had largely degraded because of the official neglect and obstruction offered by the British administration. So one of the lessons you get from these surveys is that school education was widespread, and perhaps, at least the data seems to indicate, that it was universal, that every child perhaps had received some school education. What was the content of this education, we will talk about. The other lesson you learn from these surveys is about the inclusiveness of education. In fact, if it's universal, it had to be inclusive. But there are these numbers of the people in the schools. We have been taught to believe that if there was any education in the pre-British India, it must have been confined to Brahmins and other upper castes. The surveys compiled in the Beautiful Tree indicate that it was the Shudras in the castes below them. There are these Shudras and other classes below them that form the overwhelming majority of the students at school. This was true for both the survey of Madras Presidency and survey of Bengal and Bihar in the Adams report. Dharampal has compiled caste-wise tables of scholars and teachers in the schools of different districts on the basis of Adams reports. The tables list scholars from as many as 95 Hindu castes and teachers from as many as 35 Hindu castes, besides those from belonging to the Christian and Muslim communities. When I look at these tables, this list of castes seems very similar to the current lists of other backward classes and scheduled castes that are prevailing today. So that was the level of inclusiveness, that the castes that today we call depressed and other backward class seem to be all represented in the list of teachers and the list of students. This inclusiveness of education in India disappeared during the British period. And it's doubtful whether the list of castes and students and teachers in our educational system today would be as inclusive if we were to draw similar lists of the teachers and scholars today. It wouldn't be, because I've seen those lists also of the of the teachers in our IITs, of the teachers in our IIMs, other in the central universities, also looked at the list of students in this. And that level of inclusiveness, where in the Adams report you find 95 castes represented amongst the scholars and 35 castes represented amongst the teachers, that seems still much more inclusive than what I can see today. The next issue that one looks at while looking at these surveys is about the objective of school education and its efficiency. Adam in his reports gives quite some detail about the system of school education. A very similar system is described by the collector of Bellary in his relatively detailed report to the Governor of Madras. Both insist, Adam from Bengal and Bihar and collector of Bellary from Karnataka today, both insist that the emphasis in elementary education was to impart literacy and numeracy that equipped the child to engage in the actual business of native society. That's the term they're using, that it equipped the child to engage in the actual business of his native society. This practical tendency was so pronounced that children from different sections of society taught different kinds of books and different kinds of arithmetic. Adams' report gives separate numbers of schools teaching commercial accounts or agricultural accounts or teaching both. The collector of Bellary wrote that while Ramayana, Mahabharata and Bhagavata were studied by all, yet the manufacturing classes of people had, in addition to these books, other books peculiar to their own tenets, such as Nagalingayana Katha or Vishwakarma Purana, which will be peculiar to the merchant classes. And those who wore the lingam, these are the Lingayatas, they had their own books and so on. All read Ramayana, Mahabharata and Bhagavata, but people from different classes, different communities also read their books which were special to them. And so with the arithmetic. Everybody did some simple numeracy and they learned, but they learned to keep accounts of the particular section of society from which they came. After describing in detail the content of education in Bengali elementary schools, Adams says, in the matter of instruction, there are some grounds for commendation for the course I have described has a direct practical tendency. And if it were taught in all parts, is well adapted to qualify the scholar for engaging in the actual business of native society. My recollection of the village schools of Scotland do not enable me to pronounce that the instruction given in them has a more direct bearing upon the daily interests of life than which I have find given or profess to be given in the humbler village schools of Bengal. This is special, that these schools, indigenous schools, and this every collector is saying, if he's talking about it, and Adam is saying in a very, very strong terms, that these schools have made it their business to make the children, the scholars, effective parts of the society from which they come. So they should be able to communicate with that society, write letters the way they are written within that society, and keep accounts the way it is kept within that society. And this they were able to, this level of competence, these reports are saying that children were able to achieve in about 3 to 5 years of schooling, which is very effective. It seems the students in the indigenous schools in about 5 years of schooling achieved what we today term as foundational literacy and numeracy. Perhaps it was a little more than foundational literacy and numeracy, because I what these documents are suggesting, that they were able to read also the texts of their particular community, their particular religion. They could efficiently conduct the ordinary business of their native society. While granting this, many of the European observers keep regretting that the students hardly knew any morals. And when they say morals, they meant knowledge of Christianity. And they also regretted that the students did not know much of Euclid, which meant that they didn't know Western science and technologies. Unfortunately, these concerns of the Europeans that the children should know modern morality and modern science and technology continue to distort our early schooling, with the result that many of our students fail to achieve foundational literacy and numeracy even after passing the middle stage. So that's what I am concerned about, that we should be clear about what is the objective of education at the elementary level. And the basic objective is that the child who completes, say, 5 years of schooling, he should become an effective literate and numerate member of his society. Anything more we want him to achieve, for him to know higher mathematics, for him to know physics, for him to know geography of the world, that can be achieved later. First, he must be made numerate and literate to efficiently become part of his own society. This the indigenous school system was achieving, and this our modern school system even today finds it difficult to achieve. Next, these documents tell us something about the what will be called pedagogy, the method of teaching which resulted in the children acquiring foundational numeracy and literacy in such a short period. Some of the documents collected in the beautifully, especially the report of the collector of Bellary and the Adams reports, give this pedagogy in quite some detail. How the children were taught is given in quite some detail. The essence of that pedagogy was to put the young student through a rigorous drill of repeatedly writing and pronouncing letters and words, and similarly memorizing numerals and their operations through endless repetition of rhyming arithmetical rules and multiplication tables. Now, this way of teaching persisted in India, in many parts of India, I know till 1960s, that you kept on making the child write and speak and write, and made them drill the multiplication tables, arithmetic rules, and there was a rhyming way of doing it. This pedagogy was designed to hardwire on the young brain a necessary connection between the shape of a letter and its sound. The connection between the grapheme, the shape, and the phoneme, the sound, is the essence of literacy. Okay, you become literate when the letter speaks to you, the word speaks to you, then you are literate. Similarly, that system of repetition hardwired the numbers and their operation on the minds of the young children. The European observers, including the rather skeptical collector of Bellary, had some good words for the economy with which the indigenous system imparted literacy and numeracy. The Indian way of the young children learning by repeating after the older children was also partly copied in Europe. This monitorial system, as they called, it was widely copied in Europe after they learnt it from here. But those European observers and officers also complained about the rote and memorization involved in this pedagogy. We of the modern India have taken those complaints seriously and have thus lost an effective and economic way of imparting foundational literacy and numeracy. Actually, there's nothing wrong in learning this through rote and memorization, because rules of arithmetic have to be learned, the shapes of the word letters and their connection with the sounds has to be hardwired onto your mind. Then only you become foundationally literate and numerate. There's no other way of going to that, achieving that end. These documents compiled in the Beautiful Tree also give us lists of textbooks used in the indigenous system of education. It is instructive to read just the names of those books. These relate to the core civilizational literature of India. As said, there will be texts relating to Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavatam, everywhere, but also to many other mythological stories of India, and to the various fables and stories common amongst different people. Even the arithmetic was taught through books that related to the local idiom. And as we have seen earlier, the content of arithmetic differed for students from different backgrounds. One of the first interventions of the British in education was to replace these textbooks with the new textbooks that had no relation to the society from which the students came. Madras School Book Society was established as early as 1820. This was a Christian society. Among its earliest publications were the Aesop's Tales in Tamil, and there's this Beski's Grammatica Latino Tamulica, where he tried to teach Tamil language through foreign grammars. Many of our textbooks of today are of this nature. They don't refer so much to Ramayana Mahabharata as they do to the Aesop's Tales. And the grammars that fortunately you can't do Hindi or Sanskrit grammar except through the Indian ways. But we have also tried to learn grammar in indirect ways. Then there is the question of how this system of education was funded. As we have seen, the indigenous system of education was very economic and cost nothing much more than the upkeep of the teacher. At the time of the surveys were carried out, this cost was met by small monthly fees from the students and occasional gifts to the teachers. However, there is evidence to show that there was a formal system of grants of land and a share in the produce of different localities to support the schools and the teachers. It is also known that with the establishment of the British administration, these grants of land and shares in the produce were curtailed or withdrawn. This led to the deterioration of the system, which many of the collectors of Madras and other observers repeatedly acknowledge. Governor Munro, who had certain empathy with the Indian civilizational race, was concerned about the issue, and while ordering the survey, he cautioned the collectors not to further disrupt the indigenous system. His secretary conveyed the following express injunction to the collectors. It is to be clearly understood by the collectors, the secretary says, that no interference whatever with the native school is intended through this survey. Everything of that kind should be carefully avoided, and the people should be left to manage their schools in their own ways. All that ought to be done is to facilitate the operation of the schools by restoring any funds that may have been diverted from them, and perhaps granting additional funds where it may appear advisable. So Munro was very aware that the funds which were traditionally granted to the indigenous system were already being diverted or taken away, and while ordering his survey, he was cautioning the collectors that this survey should not be made an excuse for further diverting the funds which are available to the native system. Some modern scholars have interpreted the system of indigenous schools described in the Beautiful Tree to mean that India had a private system of education. This is perverse way of looking at the documents. It is true that some private support, both from the parents and from other charitable people, was required for the maintenance of the extensive system of indigenous schools at the time when the surveys were undertaken. This was not because the system was private, but because the established stream of public funding had been disrupted by the British administration. Indian education could not have been private because India never considered education or learning to be an economic good. It would have been considered a sacrilege for a teacher to demand payment in return for imparting education, or for a student to pay a teacher money as hire for his services. The British understood this. In this context, the collector of Bellary writes that there is no doubt in the former times, especially under the Hindu governments, very large grants, both in money and in land, were issued for the support of learning. Considerable jhaumiyas, which means grants of money, now paid in to Brahmins from the treasury, and many of the numerous and valuable Shrotrium villages. Shrotrium villages are villages whose revenue has been given to a scholar. Now in the employment of Brahmins in the district, who received 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, 2/3, and sometimes the whole of their annual revenue, may I think be traced to this source. Though it did not consist with the dignity of learning to receive from its votaries hire, it has always in India been deemed the duty of the government to evince to her the highest respect and to grant to her the emoluments which she could not, consistently with her character, receive from other sources. The grants issued by the former governments on such occasions contained, therefore, no unbecoming stipulations or conditions. Actually, grants of this kind within the Indian system, normally when a grant is given, a function will be defined. That, for example, a Palekar could be given a grant for maintaining the system of security of the village, or a Kanak Pillai could be given a grant for maintaining the accounts of the village, or a Vetian could be given a grant for maintaining the irrigation system of the village. So, when a grant is given, a function will be defined. But in the case of scholars, in the case of education, the grant was given without defining a function. The grant was given and was assumed that the receiver will do what is proper to him, but it is not for the grant giver to decide what he will do. That was the kind of respect that you paid to education and to the educators. You are not hiring the services of a teacher. You cannot. You are paying for the maintenance of a scholar, and the scholar does what he is supposed to do or what he wants to do. That was the kind of way we looked at education. Such grants and shares in the produce were given not only to Brahmins, but also others who in the British records are referred to as the Malabar teacher or the Gentoo teacher. These will be non-Brahmin teachers. The government in this context did not always mean some high or mighty ruler somewhere. The government giving the grant doesn't mean that it was some high ruler giving the grant. It often meant the grama or the locality which assigned some part of its land as manyam or revenue-free land, or a defined share in its produce for the teacher, the school, or for a great scholar. The latter often then gratuitously taught students. Leitner noticed hundreds of such learned men gratuitously teaching large number of students in the Punjab of 1860s. Like education, vidya, food, anna, and health, chikitsa, were also not considered economic goods. And it would have been a sacrilege for anyone to receive money for feeding another or for a Vaidya for treating a patient. For anyone to demand money for feeding another or for a Vaidya for treating a patient would have been a sacrilege. Vidya, Anna, Chikitsa were public goods, perhaps also moral and strategic goods. In the Indian ways of being, organizing for the provision of these through private commercial effort is simply beyond imagination. From all this, it is clear that India had a very high respect for education and learning. From the documents collected in the beautiful tree, also at every place you see the great respect that India accorded learning. Leitner, in his report from Punjab, expresses this universal respect for education rather colorfully when he says, respect for learning has always been the redeeming feature of the East. To this, the Punjab has formed no exception. Torn by invasion and civil war, it ever preserved and added to educational endowments. The most unscrupulous chief, the avaricious moneylender, and even the freebooter vied with the small landowner in making peace with his conscience by founding schools and rewarding the learned. This extensive system of education that the reports from Madras, Bengal, Bihar, and Punjab, compiled in Dharmapalji's book, describe was disrupted soon after the onset of the British rule. Notwithstanding the solicitous concern of occasional officers like Governor Munro, the near universality of education that the system had provided was soon replaced by widespread illiteracy. And soon the educated Indians came to believe that this state of illiteracy had always been the reality of India. And this is very odd to come to believe that India was an illiterate society, a society in which education is put on such a high pedestal. How could it would have been illiterate? It's very difficult to understand. And all of this data that Dharmapalji has provided indicates that India was a literate society, a numerate society, and our understanding that illiteracy and lack of numeracy was the condition of India is a grave error. Mahatma Gandhi, during his visit to England for the Round Table Conference in 1931, gave a public speech at the Chatham House. In this speech, along with several other issues, he spoke about education in India and its destruction by the British. Thus, he said, I say without fear of my figures being challenged successfully that today India is more illiterate than it was 50 or 100 years ago. And so is Burma, because the British administrators, when they came to India, instead of taking hold of things as they were, began to look at the root and left the root like that, and the beautiful tree perished. Dharmapalji took the name of his book from this reference of Mahatma Gandhi to the beautiful tree of indigenous education. That beautiful tree has still not been revived to its full glory and refulgence. Large number of Indians still remain devoid of even functional literacy and numeracy because, like the British administrators, we too find our indigenous system and our time-tested pedagogies to be inadequate. Unfortunately, the National Education Policy 2022, while recognizing the prevalent lack of foundational literacy and numeracy, seems to have taken no step in the direction of solving the problem. The problem persists in spite of the greatly expanded and expensive system of schooling that we have now established. Reading the beautiful tree once again may help us in finding ways of ameliorating the situation, looking back at the way we are, and to make ourselves afresh in our image. Thank you.
तो मेरा तो एक पहला क्वेश्चन ये था जो आपने बताया था ना 1822 में थॉमस मुनरो जब वो सर्वे करते हैं तो he made separate columns for Brahmin. So is there any figure how many columns did they made?
What I will suggest is I have counted those columns for you. That there was this, there are the columns of total of various kinds, but there is the column for Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, other classes, and then Muslims.
6, 7.
No, 6 is this from Madras, so there are no 6. And 6, if they come, actually at that time, they would have come under one of the castes. But while I think separately, this format, we can put it in show it in the video later. The format that he sent, that Monroe sent.
While British interfered with this existing system, which was very efficient, their purpose was clearly sort of globalization, so they can have the colonies and then interact better for their own good.
No, one reason is, of course, the time when they came here, there was hardly much public education in England. So all the numbers indicate that if we look at the numbers of the Madras survey and the corresponding numbers of the percentage of people going to school at that time in England and Europe, the number will be much lower. So they were yet not in that frame of mind, or they not learned that the government organizes for public education. It was a new thing for them, and since they didn't do it in their home country, they wouldn't know that it's being done here. So what they did was, because what was being paid to the teacher for education or for the school was being paid out of the funds of the village, which they claimed was part of their revenue.
Their taxes.
Their tax. So it will be paid out of the produce of the land for education. And that produce that part they took it back as their revenue. So they deprived
They deprived the funds that were going to the local education system at that time. When later they came with a standardized education system.
On that, of course, immediately when this report goes to England, there is instruction from there that don't go in this direction. We'll have a different.
With a different agenda, instead of supporting the indigenous strengths.
Right. So they didn't want to.
And we are still following that system. We have not decided to come back to our indigenous system.
We never decided to do that.
Following.
We are still continuing to follow that system.
And that is why we are saying that we are more globalized. We are more fit to be a global citizen, a global employee citizen. But
no, but that is true, because I don't know the final version says it or not, but in several versions of the National Education Policy of 2022, one of the main objectives of education was said to be making the Indians global citizens. It was written in so many words.
So we are still not recognizing the importance and self-sustenance of being an indigenous.
Because even today, I think most people think the purpose of education is to make us global citizens, instead of making us part of our own society.
So somewhere I'm not able to recall from whom I learned this, but somebody told me that Vedas were part of that rote learning in the early ages. कि कोई first मतलब कोई पहला वेद याद करता था, कोई दूसरा
नहीं, this school education and which I have described to you, is the elementary education is for literacy and numeracy. Vedas come after that.
It comes after.
After that.
Or was it even more ancient, maybe like in BC?
No, from this, say the colleges which I have not described, they will be colleges of Vedas, there will be colleges of Tarka, there will be colleges of Vyakarana, where what you are saying will be taught. That will have its own system. There were colleges of that kind, for which also there were large numbers counted of those also. Where here, if the students may be spending only about 5 years, there the students will be spending much longer in the colleges of that kind. And there, of course, with the colleges of also of Ayurveda, of Veda, of Tarka, of Vyakarana, of Nyaya. So there will be, and college most usually will mean a learned scholar of a particular subject, having students around him, living with him.
And so when we say they were locally funded, are we talking about the panchayat system? And has Dharampal sir talked about it, the panchayat system, how it worked in those times?
Okay, the panchayat is a modern modern structure. There was a local community which, well, the better word is grama.
Gram.
Grama is a corporate entity which has the attributes of a state, which
So they were funded.
it will be the grama which will be from its resources, as it will be organizing several other things, it will be also organizing for education.